Ilara lived in the quiet village of Meadowbrook, nestled beside rolling green hills. Her days were filled with the gentle rhythm of needle and thread. She wasn't known for grand pronouncements or boisterous laughter. Instead, her voice was soft, like the rustle of silk, and her presence was a calming balm to those around her. Her small cottage, overflowing with colorful scraps of fabric, was a testament to her artistry. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating bolts of cotton, linen, and velvet in every imaginable hue. Ilara's hands, though small, were incredibly skilled. She could transform simple cloth into works of art, delicate lace doilies, warm woolen blankets, and elegant dresses for the town's ladies. Each stitch was placed with precision and care, reflecting her quiet dedication and love for her craft. People often sought her out for mending and alterations, trusting her keen eye and steady hand to make their clothes look their best. She had a way of seeing beauty in the ordinary, finding inspiration in the patterns of the wildflowers that grew in the meadow, or the way the sunlight danced on the surface of the nearby stream. Her neighbors appreciated her gentle spirit and the quiet acts of kindness she offered, like mending a tear in a child's favorite toy or gifting a warm scarf to an elderly woman during the cold winter months. Her face, framed by soft brown hair, was usually serene, her eyes a clear blue, reflecting the peacefulness of her life. But lately, a shadow of concern had begun to cloud her features. The whispers carried on the wind spoke of hardship and suffering in the neighboring farmlands. The faces of the farmers who occasionally visited Meadowbrook were gaunt and etched with worry. It was a story that needed a voice, a visual representation of the injustice, and Ilara knew, deep in her heart, that she was the one who could create it. The tales of the farmhands grew more dire with each passing day. Travelers passing through Meadowbrook brought news of withered crops, empty bellies, and the iron fist of Silas Blackwood, the wealthy landowner who held the farmhands in his cruel grasp. Blackwood, they said, hoarded the grain, selling it for exorbitant prices in distant cities while his own workers starved. He cared nothing for their suffering, only for the gleam of gold in his coffers. Ilara heard stories of families forced to eat bark and roots to survive, of children with swollen bellies and vacant eyes, and of strong men weakened by hunger, unable to work the fields. She saw the worry etched on the faces of her neighbors, the way they shared their meager portions of food, knowing that even in Meadowbrook, times were growing harder. Old man Fitzwilliam, who delivered milk to the village each morning, spoke of visiting the farms and seeing the desperation firsthand. "They're good people, Ilara," he'd said, his voice thick with sadness. "Hardworking and honest, they don't deserve this." He described the once vibrant fields, now parched and barren, and the skeletal cattle that roamed them, a grim reminder of Blackwood's greed. The injustice of it all settled heavily on Ilara's heart. She couldn't understand how one man could be so heartless, so indifferent to the suffering of others. She tried to imagine the fear and despair that the farmhands must be feeling, the hopelessness that threatened to consume them. One evening, as Ilara sat by her window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, she knew she could no longer remain silent. The faces of the starving children haunted her dreams. The stories of Blackwood's cruelty echoed in her mind. She had to do something, anything, to help. The seed of an idea began to sprout within her, a way to give the farmhands a voice, a symbol of hope in their darkest hour. She would create a banner, a visual cry for justice that would resonate throughout the land. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. The image of the banner filled her mind, its size, its colors, the very words it would carry. It wouldn't be just any banner, it would be a beacon of hope, a symbol of defiance against injustice. She tossed and turned, ideas swirling around her like threads caught in a whirlwind. As the first rays of dawn peeked through her window, she rose from her bed, her mind clear and focused. She knew exactly what she had to do. She went to her work table, her fingers tracing the patterns of the fabrics she had collected over the years. Each piece held a memory, a story of its own. There was the deep blue velvet from a gown she had made for the mayor's daughter, the sturdy brown linen from a farmer's coat she had mended, and the bright yellow cotton from a child's sun dress. She carefully selected the fabrics, choosing colors that would evoke the emotions she wanted to convey. A deep, rich brown to represent the earth, a vibrant green for hope and renewal, and a stark white for purity and justice. She knew the banner had to be large enough to be seen from afar, to command attention and draw people together. She began to sketch out her design on a large piece of parchment, her hand moving with confidence and purpose. She envisioned a simple yet powerful image, a field of wheat representing the farmhand's livelihood, overshadowed by a dark, looming figure representing Blackwood's greed. Beneath the image, she would embroider a message, a call for fairness and compassion. Alara felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins. This was more than just a sewing project, it was a mission, a calling. She was determined to create a banner that would not only raise awareness of the farmhand's plight, but also inspire others to take action and demand justice. The weight of responsibility settled upon her shoulders, but she embraced it willingly, knowing that she was doing what was right. The quiet seamstress was ready to become a voice for the voiceless. The next few days were a flurry of activity in Alara's cottage. The rhythmic hum of her sewing machine filled the air as she worked tirelessly on the banner. Scraps of fabric littered the floor like fallen leaves in autumn as she meticulously cut, pieced, and stitched the materials together. Her fingers, usually nimble and graceful, became calloused and pricked with needle marks, but she barely noticed the discomfort. Her focus was entirely on the task at hand. First, she carefully assembled the background of the banner, sewing together large panels of brown linen to create a sturdy base. Then she began to applique the field of wheat, using delicate stitches to attach the golden yellow cotton to the brown background. She painstakingly crafted each stalk of wheat, ensuring that it was perfectly formed and realistically depicted. Next came the looming figure of Blackwood, which she created from dark gray wool. She deliberately made the figure large and imposing, casting a long shadow over the wheat field, symbolizing his oppressive control. The figure's face was left intentionally blank, a faceless representation of greed and cruelty. Finally, she began to embroider the message onto the banner, using thick, bold stitches of white thread. The words she chose were simple but powerful: food for all. She wanted the message to be clear and concise, easily understood by everyone who saw it. As she stitched each letter, she whispered a prayer for the farmhands, hoping that her banner would bring them comfort and hope. The cottage became her sanctuary, a place where she could pour her heart and soul into her creation. She barely ate or slept, driven by an unwavering determination to finish the banner and make a difference. The fabric became an extension of herself, a tangible expression of her compassion and her commitment to justice. The faces of the farmhands were always in her mind, giving her strength and guiding her every stitch. Each pass of the needle was a silent promise to fight for their well-being. With the last stitch sewn and the final thread snipped, Alara stepped back to admire her creation. The banner was even more striking than she had imagined. The rough texture of the brown linen evoked the harsh realities of the farmhands' lives, while the bright yellow wheat field offered a glimmer of hope. The dark gray figure of Blackwood loomed ominously, a stark reminder of the injustice they faced. And the bold white letters of the message, "Food for all," stood out against the dark background, a powerful call for compassion and fairness. The banner was heavy, a testament to the hours of labor and the weight of the message it carried. As Alara ran her hand over the surface of the fabric, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. She had poured her heart and soul into this creation, and she knew that it had the power to make a difference. The symbolism within the banner was carefully considered. The brown represented the land itself and the labor of the farmhands. The golden wheat was not just food, but abundance and the promise of a good harvest, stolen by Blackwood's greed. The looming gray figure, intentionally without a face, represented not just Blackwood, but all those who put profit before people. The white lettering of Food for All was chosen to be the color of peace, surrender, and the simple, basic need that was being denied. She carefully folded the banner, her movements reverent. She knew that it was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of hope, a call for justice, and a testament to the power of unity. It was a story told in fabric and thread, a visual representation of the farmhands' suffering and their unwavering spirit. She felt a surge of hope, believing that this banner could be the spark that ignited a flame of change. It was time to share her creation with the world. The quiet seamstress was ready to unveil her voice. As Alara prepared to leave her cottage, a dark cloud fell over Meadowbrook. A rider galloped into town, his horse lathered in sweat, shouting a warning. "Slavers, slavers are coming." The news spread like wildfire, igniting fear and panic in the hearts of the townspeople. Silas Blackwood, in his desperation to maintain his wealth and power, had hired a notorious band of slavers to round up the starving farmhands and force them into indentured servitude. These men were ruthless and cruel, known for their brutality and their disregard for human life. The townspeople scrambled to protect themselves and their families. Doors were bolted, windows were shuttered, and children were hidden away. A sense of dread settled over Meadowbrook, silencing the laughter and joy that had once filled its streets. Alara stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The slavers' arrival changed everything. The banner, which had been intended as a symbol of hope and a call for justice, now represented a direct challenge to the slavers' authority. She knew that unveiling it now would be a dangerous act, but she also knew that she couldn't stand by and watch as the farmhands were dragged away into slavery. She clutched the banner tightly in her arms, her knuckles white. The faces of the starving children flashed before her eyes, fueling her determination. She had to do something, anything, to stop the slavers and protect the farmhands. A new idea sparked in her mind, a daring and audacious plan that would put her life at risk. She would raise the banner from the highest point in town, the church steeple, as a beacon of defiance and a rallying cry for the townspeople to unite and resist the slavers. It was a risky gamble, but Alara knew that it was the only way to save the farmhands and restore hope to Meadowbrook. The time for quiet contemplation was over. It was time for bold action. The roar she had hoped to inspire was about to be tested. The slavers rode into Meadowbrook like a storm, a dark and menacing presence that seemed to suck the very air from the town. Their leader, a hulking brute of a man named Cale, sat atop a massive black horse, his face scarred and weathered, his eyes cold and cruel. He wore a leather vest studded with metal, and a whip dangled menacingly from his belt. Behind him rode his posse, a motley crew of hardened criminals and ruthless mercenaries. They were armed to the teeth with swords, knives, and pistols, their faces grim and determined. Their horses were equally imposing, their hooves pounding against the cobblestone streets, echoing the fear that reverberated through the town. They moved with a swaggering arrogance, their eyes scanning the buildings, searching for any sign of resistance. The townsfolk peeked out from behind closed curtains, their faces pale with fear. The slavers' reputation preceded them. Everyone knew of their brutality and their willingness to use violence to achieve their goals. Cale reined in his horse in the center of town, his voice booming like thunder. "Attention, people of Meadowbrook," he shouted. "We are here to collect the farmhands who are indebted to Silas Blackwood. Cooperate and you will not be harmed. Resist and you will face the consequences." His words hung in the air, heavy with menace. The slavers dismounted, their boots hitting the ground with a thud. They spread out through the town, kicking down doors, dragging people from their homes, and terrorizing anyone who dared to stand in their way. The screams of the frightened townspeople filled the air, a symphony of despair that echoed the farmhands' suffering. The dream of food or peace was dead for many in Meadowbrook. Even Alara in the church could hear the first sounds of the horror. Alara knew that she had to act quickly. Every moment that passed increased the risk to the farm hands and the townspeople. She hoisted the banner onto her shoulder, her heart pounding in her chest, and slipped out of her cottage, heading towards the church. Her face was set with determination, her eyes fixed on the steeple, her destination. The roar she needed was about to be tested. Reaching the church, Alara slipped inside, her heart pounding in her ears. The heavy wooden doors creaked shut behind her, muffling the sounds of chaos outside. The church was empty and silent, the only light filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the stone floor. She made her way to the base of the steeple, where a narrow, winding staircase led to the top. Taking a deep breath, she began to climb, the banner slung over her shoulder. The stairs were steep and uneven, and the air grew thinner with each step. Her legs burned and her lungs ached, but she pressed on, fueled by adrenaline and determination. As she climbed higher, she could hear the sounds of the slavers more clearly, their shouts, the cracking of whips, and the cries of the terrified townspeople. The weight of the banner seemed to grow heavier with each step, a physical manifestation of the burden she carried. Finally, she reached the top of the steeple, a small, cramped space with a single window overlooking the town. The view was breathtaking, but Alara had no time to admire it. She unfolded the banner, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. The wind whipped around her, threatening to tear the banner from her grasp. Looking out over Meadowbrook, she saw the slavers rounding up the townspeople like cattle, their faces grim and determined. The faces of the townspeople were etched with fear and despair, their eyes pleading for help. Alara knew that this was her moment. She had to act now before it was too late. She took a deep breath, gathered all her strength, and began to raise the banner, its message rippling in the wind. The weight of the fabric pulled at her arms, threatening to topple her over, but she held on tight, her determination unwavering. The roar she sought was only moments away. With a final surge of strength, Alara heaved the banner over the edge of the steeple window. The wind caught it immediately, unfurling it like a sail. The heavy fabric tugged at her arms, threatening to pull her off balance. She gripped the edges tightly, her knuckles white, her feet planted firmly on the narrow ledge. The banner billowed in the wind, its message clear for all to see. The brown linen flapped like the wings of a giant bird, the golden wheat shimmered in the sunlight, the dark gray figure loomed menacingly, and the bold white letters of "Food for All" stood out against the sky. Below, the slavers paused in their brutal work, their heads turning towards the steeple. The townspeople, their faces pale with fear, also looked up, their eyes widening in surprise and disbelief. The silence was broken only by the flapping of the banner and the whistling of the wind. Alara stood tall, her small frame silhouetted against the sky, her face set with determination. She was no longer just a quiet seamstress. She was a symbol of hope, a beacon of resistance, a voice for the voiceless. The wind whipped her hair around her face, stinging her eyes, but she refused to blink. She held the banner high, her arms aching, her muscles screaming, but she refused to let go. She knew that the fate of the farmhands, and perhaps the entire town, rested on her shoulders. The banner danced in the wind, its message echoing the silent prayers of the townspeople. Alara could feel their eyes on her, their hopes rising with the banner. She knew that she had to be strong, that she had to hold on, that she had to inspire them to action. The roar was coming. The very fabric of the town was shifting. This simple act of courage, of defiance, was changing everything. The townspeople, witnessing her bravery, began to stir. At first, the townspeople simply stared, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They had never seen Alara act so boldly, so defiantly. She had always been so quiet, so unassuming. But as they looked at the banner, its message clear and unwavering, a spark of hope began to flicker in their eyes. A few brave souls emerged from their homes, their faces etched with a newfound resolve. They gathered in small groups, whispering amongst themselves, their eyes fixed on the banner. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with a growing sense of determination. Old Man Fitzwilliam, the milk deliverer, was one of the first to step forward. His face, usually creased with worry, was now set with a grim determination. He raised his fist in the air, shouting, "Food for all." His voice was weak and raspy, but it carried a powerful message of defiance. Others joined him, their voices growing louder, their numbers swelling. Women emerged from their homes, armed with kitchen knives and rolling pins. Farmers grabbed their pitchforks and shovels. Even the children, their eyes wide with excitement, picked up stones and sticks. The slavers, their faces contorted with anger and frustration, tried to disperse the crowd, but it was too late. The banner had ignited a flame of resistance in the hearts of the townspeople, and they were no longer willing to be intimidated. The murmur of the crowd grew into a roar, a collective expression of outrage and defiance. The roar she needed had begun. The townspeople of Meadowbrook, once fearful and divided, were now united in their determination to stand up to the slavers and protect their community. The faces of the townspeople were no longer etched with fear, but with a fierce resolve. Ilara, watching from the steeple, felt a surge of pride and hope. Her banner had worked. The roar was growing louder. The roar of the crowd was deafening, a tidal wave of sound that washed over Meadowbrook, shaking the very foundations of the town. It was a primal scream, a collective expression of years of pent-up frustration and anger. It was the sound of ordinary people finding their voice, their courage, their power. The slavers, momentarily stunned by the sudden eruption of defiance, hesitated. Their leader, Cale, his face contorted with rage, shouted orders to his men, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The townspeople surged forward, their makeshift weapons raised high, their faces contorted with determination. They were farmers and shopkeepers, housewives and children, ordinary people who had been pushed too far. They were no match for the slavers in terms of skill or weaponry, but they had something that the slavers lacked: a burning desire for justice and a fierce determination to protect their community. Old Man Fitzwilliam, despite his age and frailty, led the charge, his milk cart rattling behind him. The women, armed with kitchen knives and rolling pins, fought with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. The children, their eyes shining with excitement, pelted the slavers with stones, distracting them and disrupting their formations. The slavers, initially confident and arrogant, were now on the defensive, struggling to maintain their ground against the onslaught of the enraged townspeople. The fight was chaotic and brutal, a swirling mass of bodies, weapons, and shouts. But the townspeople fought with a courage and determination that inspired them. Ilara, watching from the steeple, felt a surge of pride and hope. Her banner had ignited a spark of resistance, and the townspeople had responded with a roar of defiance. The roar she needed was there, and it was beautiful. The sound, the sight of the united town, strengthened her resolve. She knew that the fight was far from over, but she also knew that the townspeople had a chance to win. The tables had turned, the hunters had become the hunted, the enslaved were about to be free. The fight had reached a fever pitch. The townspeople, emboldened by their shared purpose and the sight of the banner fluttering above them, pressed their attack, driving the slavers back towards the center of town. Cale, realizing that he was losing control of the situation, gathered his remaining men around him, forming a defensive circle. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes darting around, searching for a way out. The townspeople, their faces flushed with adrenaline, surrounded the slavers, their makeshift weapons raised high. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the heavy breathing of the fighters and the occasional sob of fear. Old Man Fitzwilliam stepped forward, his milk cart positioned strategically behind him, providing cover for the women and children. His voice, though still raspy, rang out with authority. "Leave now, Cale," he shouted. "Leave our town and never return. We will not let you take our people." Cale sneered, his eyes filled with contempt. "You think you can stop me, old man?" he spat. You're nothing but a bunch of farmers and shopkeepers. You're no match for me and my men." "We may not be warriors, Cale," Fitzwilliam replied, his voice steady, "but we are united. And we will fight for our freedom." A tense silence descended upon the crowd, the standoff broken only by the flapping of Alara's banner high above. Every face was turned towards Cale, waiting for his response. The faces of the townspeople reflected a mix of fear and resolve. The face of Cale mirrored the rage and desperation of a man about to lose everything. Cale, his eyes narrowed, surveyed the crowd, assessing his options. He knew that he was outnumbered and outmatched. The townspeople, fueled by their determination and the sight of the banner, were not going to back down. He realized that he had underestimated them. He had underestimated their courage, their unity, and their willingness to fight for what they believed in. The tide had turned, and Cale knew it. He had to make a choice. The roar of the crowd was a constant reminder of his precarious position. From her vantage point atop the steeple, Alara was a beacon of hope, a symbol of unwavering resistance. Her quiet strength resonated throughout the town, inspiring the townspeople to stand their ground, even in the face of overwhelming odds. They looked to her not for tactical commands or battle strategies, but for the courage to keep fighting. Her presence, her unwavering gaze, her unwavering grip on the banner, these were the things that fueled their determination. She was a reminder of what they were fighting for: their freedom, their community, and their right to live in peace. Even Cale, in his desperation, couldn't help but glance up at the steeple, his eyes drawn to the fluttering banner and the small figure that held it aloft. He knew that she was the key to their resistance, the source of their unwavering determination. He understood that as long as she stood tall, the townspeople would never surrender. The townspeople's faces turned toward her, seeking strength in the sight of the banner, seeking strength in the face of Alara. Alara, in turn, drew strength from the townspeople. The faces of the farmers, the women, the children, their courage, their unity, their unwavering determination fueled her resolve. She knew that she could not let them down. She had to be strong, she had to be brave, she had to hold on no matter what. Suddenly, a young boy broke away from the crowd, running towards the slavers. He was unarmed, but his face was set with determination. He ran straight towards Cale, shouting, "Leave our town." Cale, startled by the boy's audacity, raised his whip, preparing to strike. But before he could react, Old Man Fitzwilliam stepped in front of the boy, shielding him from the blow. The whip cracked against Fitzwilliam's back, sending him sprawling to the ground. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by a renewed surge of anger and defiance. The townspeople, their faces contorted with rage, surged forward, their weapons raised high. The confrontation was about to escalate. Alara's leadership, her quiet strength, was about to be tested to its limits. The faces of the townspeople were fierce, and the roar was building again. The sight of Old Man Fitzwilliam falling sparked a frenzy of action. The townspeople, fueled by righteous anger, surged forward, their makeshift weapons finding their mark. The slavers, outnumbered and outmatched, fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer force of the townspeople's determination. Women wielding kitchen knives disarmed slavers twice their size. Farmers with their pitchforks pinned the slavers to the ground. Even the children, darting in and out of the fray, tripped up the slavers and pelted them with stones. The fight was a chaotic ballet of courage and desperation. The air was filled with shouts, screams, and the clash of weapons. The faces of the townspeople were contorted with rage, but their eyes shone with a fierce determination. They were fighting for their freedom, for their community, and for their right to live in peace. As the townspeople gained the upper hand, they turned their attention to the captured farmhands, who were huddled together in the center of the town, guarded by a handful of slavers. With a renewed surge of energy, the townspeople charged towards the farmhands, their weapons raised high. The slavers guarding the farmhands, seeing that the tide had turned, quickly surrendered. The townspeople, their faces beaming with joy, rushed to free the farmhands, cutting their bonds and offering them food and water. The farmhands, their faces etched with relief and gratitude, embraced their rescuers, their tears of sorrow turning into tears of joy. The daring rescue was complete. The townspeople of Meadowbrook, united and determined, had overpowered the slavers and freed the farmhands. The roar of the crowd was now a triumphant cheer, a celebration of their hard-won victory. Ilara, watching from the steeple, felt her heart swell with pride and joy. Her banner had inspired them to act, and their courage had saved the day. The faces of the townspeople were radiant with hope, and the roar of their victory echoed throughout the land. With the farmhands freed and the slavers defeated, a wave of relief washed over Meadowbrook. The remaining slavers, including a defeated and humiliated Cale, were rounded up and unceremoniously driven out of town, banished from ever returning. The townspeople then turned their attention to the rescued farmhands, welcoming them with open arms. They were given food, water, and medical attention, their faces slowly regaining their color and their spirits lifting with each passing moment. The town's church and hall were open to the farmhands, offering shelter and a place to rest. Ilara, after carefully lowering the banner from the steeple, hurried to join the celebration. She helped to tend to the wounded, offering words of comfort and encouragement. As the sun began to set, the townspeople gathered in the center of Meadowbrook, their faces radiant with joy and gratitude. A feast was prepared, with everyone sharing what little they had to celebrate their hard-won victory. Old man Fitzwilliam, his back bandaged and his face pale, was hailed as a hero. He humbly accepted their praise, deflecting the attention to Ilara, the quiet seamstress who had inspired them all. The townspeople turned to Ilara, their faces filled with admiration and respect. They hoisted her onto their shoulders, parading her through the streets, chanting her name and praising her courage. A bonfire was lit, casting a warm glow over the town. The townspeople sang songs, danced, and celebrated their victory long into the night. The faces of the farmhands were now filled with hope, their eyes shining with gratitude. They had been given a second chance, a new lease on life, thanks to the courage and compassion of the townspeople of Meadowbrook. Ilara's banner, now carefully folded, was placed at the foot of the bonfire, a symbol of their unity and their unwavering commitment to justice. The roar of celebration continued, echoing through the hills. The days that followed were filled with rebuilding and healing. The farmhands, welcomed as members of the community, began to work alongside the townspeople, replanting the fields and restoring the farms. Silas Blackwood, facing the wrath of the freed farmhands and the united townspeople, fled the area, never to be seen again. Ilara returned to her quiet life, but she was no longer just a seamstress. She was a hero, a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest voice can make a difference. Her cottage, once a place of quiet solitude, became a gathering place for the townspeople, who sought her advice and guidance. The banner, carefully preserved, was hung in the town hall, a constant reminder of their victory and their unwavering commitment to justice. It became a symbol of hope and resistance, inspiring other towns to stand up to oppression and fight for what is right. Ilara continued to sew, her hands as skilled as ever, but her work now had a new purpose. She created quilts for the needy, blankets for the homeless, and banners for other towns fighting for their freedom. Each stitch was a testament to her unwavering commitment to justice and compassion. Her face, once serene and quiet, now radiated a quiet strength and determination. Her eyes, always clear and blue, now sparkled with a newfound wisdom and understanding. She had found her voice, and she was determined to use it to make the world a better place. And so, Ilara, the quiet seamstress of Meadowbrook, became a legend, a symbol of hope and resistance for generations to come. Her banner, her courage, and her unwavering commitment to justice inspired others to stand up for what is right, to fight for their freedom, and to create a world where everyone has access to food, shelter, and opportunity. The roar of her legacy continues to echo through the hills.